And overcoming challenges or setback, it's easy for me to say now, but they're never as bad as you think they are at the time. I've got my own channel called It's All About Choices. And the point is of that channel is to talk about careers, but also to say that just because you made a choice then, you don't have to really concern yourself with it too much now. As long as you've learned from it, you've moved on, and if you needed to, make amends. It's more about saying, try something. If it doesn't work, try again, because practice makes perfect. So the challenges that I've had to overcome have formed me.
Hello and welcome to Career Spotlight with Vanessa Ajimai. Today I have another amazing guest as usual. So make sure that you stay tuned in order to hear amazing career story journeys about choices and decisions that people have made, and also some industry insights as well. So today I have with me David Barrow, who is an enterprise service management consultant. He is also an author, a speaker, and a mentor of the Read Women in Technology. As well as that, David also sits on the committee for BCS, British Standards Institute, and also the International Organisation for Standardisation. So a big mouthful and loads of different roles in one. David, thank you so much for agreeing to come and share your career journey with us today. So as usual, we'll jump straight into it. If you could, I've kind of pinpointed some of the things that you do, the titles per se, like if you could just tell us about your role.
Sure. So firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to come along and for having me here today. I appreciate it. And well done. The ISO one, it's the one that always trips me up when I introduce myself as well. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
So yeah, my title is that of an enterprise service management consultant. What that really means is I work with organizations. I work with their teams, their leaders, their customers, and their business partners. And ultimately, what I'm trying to do with them is deliver valuable digital services. So you can call it IT, you can call it whatever you want, but it's essentially turning products into services. And more that role, and it's something I've made up, this isn't an official role, but more and more that role is becoming what I'm calling the value co-creator. So because I work with lots of people to try and co-create value for them, for their organization, but ultimately for their customers and their employees, so people have a great experience when they use digital services.
Great. So if we take it right back, could you kind of go through some of the key points or milestones that has taken place through your journey for you to get to this position that you're in now?
Yeah, sure. So we're going back a long time, I'm afraid. It's 30 years next month that I started full-time work.
Okay.
But the reality is I come from like a traditional market town in the north of England. But prior to moving there, I'd been in 3 different schools. And I mention that because that wasn't me working by any stretch of the imagination, but what that was doing, it was ultimately leading me up to today where I'm comfortable being in situations where maybe other people are uncomfortable. So I have no problem arriving in a new space, making myself known and speaking to people. But where I do have a historical issue is I left school at 16 with just a few GCSEs, and it was all down to me not taking school seriously. It just didn't do anything for me. I was never, ever in trouble. I just was completely disinterested. But to kind of come onto the journey, so I left school. I was always a bit industrious in terms of trying to make money. So I used to get my mum to make me loads of sandwiches, which I'd sell at school because the school dinners weren't so good. I did paper rounds. But also when I left school, I joined a local job club And I only remembered this when my father reminded me of it a few months ago. Because all I remember was going to a place where me and my mates would hang out and basically have a laugh. And all of us that kind of left school the first day we all went there. So I actually feel really sorry for the people that were trying to help us at that time. But as part of doing that, I went to what they labeled a practice interview. And that practice interview was with a 2-man IT company in this small market town that I'm from. So it was like, wow, computers, this is awesome. You know, I don't have to go and work in manufacturing or on a farm. I don't have to do anything from a labor perspective. I'm going to see what I can do with these guys. And they asked me a question, which I wasn't expecting, which was, can you build a computer? But I said, yes. And then they said, well, go and build one then. And I was like, oh no, what have I done here? But it turned out I could build a computer because it's not actually that complicated. So that was like my first step on the career ladder, because that practice interview became my job. And I earned as much in a week in that job as I earned in 4 days doing my paper round. So I was effectively doubling up my money every week, which gave me the freedom to go and buy a motorbike and to start exploring the world a bit more. But in terms of milestones, in 30 years, there's an awful lot. So as not to bore you or those watching, I'm going to try and just go for 3 if I could.
Yeah.
So at the age of sort of 18, 19, I worked as a coder and I was absolutely shocking at it. Terrible, awful. I'm the worst coder that's ever existed. I then worked as a network engineer for a company that supplied software for the motor trade, which I loved because I got to drive around the country to awesome car garages. And every time I took a drill out, they'd make me move a nice car so I didn't make the car dirty. So I got to sort of jump in these nice cars as well. But I was also really bad at that. Anyone who knows me will tell you I have got absolutely zero common sense when it comes to DIY, and it proved itself right in that job. But I got away with it because I was really good with the customers. So I'd be really friendly with the customers. But in terms of milestone in an event, I was a passenger in a car accident that meant I wasn't like seriously hurt, but I just couldn't drive as far anymore for a period of time. So the company said, would you work on the help desk? And that's where I found my niche, because now I was just chatting to people, the very same people I'd met face to face, they were asking for me when they called the help desk. So it instantly set me on this kind of successful path from the help desk perspective. That led me into another role where I worked as a Microsoft trainer. So I was training footballers, cricketers, and kind of B-rate actors who'd bought computers at the time and had no idea how to use them. So that was quite fun. But I also ended up training some team members from a company I'm sure the vast majority of people would be aware of, called IBM. And as a result, IBM offered me a job, and that's really where I never looked back from that point forward. They gave me an education that literally no college or university could have ever given me. They saw stuff in me that I didn't see in myself. And they put me on like a young managers program and really developed me, gave me loads of trust to go and develop myself too. So that was awesome, and I'll always thank IBM for that. But after 8 years, I left IBM. They were offering voluntary redundancy, and I felt like, when you grow up somewhere and you're like, I know it intimately and it's all a bit samey, I've made this decision that I wanted to go and challenge myself. So I ended up working in the city of London in financial services, and boy, was that a challenge, because I've gone from this really ordered mechanical world of IBM, that's why they're called the international business machine, into the utter madness of the trading floor in London, where I was running IT services that were costing an inordinate amount of money. And I was, there was no contract. It was get this working and lumps of paper getting thrown at me. But then at the end of the day, we'd all go out and celebrate. So I then ended up running, and that was a real kind of milestone for me, because it meant I could test myself. It meant I could take everything I'd learned in IBM and try and apply it in chaos, which is something I'd recommend to anyone. And from there, I ended up working for another huge company called Capgemini. And another milestone moment was I ended up running government IT services for government departments. And then when I moved on from CAP, the kind of the last milestone that I'll just cover briefly is that, a bit like when I left IBM, I thought to myself, I've now been working for sort of 20-ish years.
Yeah.
I thought, what is there for me to do now? Like I was running IT services, and it was a challenging role. It was a good job. There was good benefits. There was nothing wrong with the job at all, but it wasn't stimulating me, and it wasn't necessarily meeting my own ethics and goals. So I chose to go out on my own, to become self-employed, and that's really where I've never looked back from since. But everything those companies did for me led me to that day. I just wish I'd have done it sooner, because I think I'd have probably been happier a bit sooner as well.
Yeah. And like throughout your journey, it sounds like whenever you feel that you've become too comfortable, then you kind of want to then make a move. Is that?
Yeah. And probably the only reason I lasted 8 years at IBM and it was a good 6 or 7 at Capgemini was because they gave me the opportunity every year to go and work in a different client. So, and it goes back to what I said at the very beginning about my time at school. I was able to like say to them, yeah, I'll jump in there. I'll go and take on this problem account and I'll go and help them. So had it have been any other organization which was smaller, I probably have gone for a new, entirely different organization every year. But because of the size of those organizations, they gave me opportunities to test myself every year. But ultimately at CAP, you get to a certain level in such a huge organization where the next step is almost insurmountable, or it's not something you want. And I was at that point where it wasn't something I wanted. So again, it was, okay, what can I do that will challenge me, that is going to satisfy me? And ultimately it became about working for myself, and trying out everything I've learned from those organizations on my own, which is quite scary, but quite fun at the same time.
When you started working for yourself, did you feel ready?
No. And I didn't feel ready 10 years before, but now 10 years later, I wish I'd have done it 10 years before. So I don't think anyone ever really feels ready. And I actually think that that's a good thing, but knowing how to harness it, that's where your maturity and your experience comes in. And I was too immature and didn't have the right experience to harness it. And then other things get in the way as well. So you get to a point where you've got a mortgage, you've got things you need to pay for, you've got a lifestyle you're accustomed to, you've got benefits. They make you kind of rely on them, you become comfortable with them. When you go self-employed, you either have to put all of those things at risk or take real kind of studious planning to make sure they're safe. So yeah, I wasn't ready, but I'm actually looking back, I was probably ready 10 years earlier. I just didn't have the wherewithal to give it a go.
Sure. So for those that might be thinking about a career within enterprise service management, what skills do you think one needs in order to be successful?
So ultimately, I think you need people skills. So, which is a mad thing when I'm talking about a technology sector. But what enterprise service management is it's identifying the great things we do in IT, where we produce services and we deliver them to consumers and customers. That's IT service management. Enterprise service management is being able to apply those lessons you've learned in the rest of the organization. So working with finance, working with people and culture, working with marketing to really kind of build the path of digital services. And that's why I say people skills. You want to be able to ask questions. So that is not be afraid to ask a question and not think you know so much that you shouldn't ask a question. You want to be able to listen. So when somebody's telling you what they need from a service or what's wrong with a service, You need to be able to listen to them and really take that in. Empathize. A lot of my work is working with people who are having an issue with something. And that comes back to the service desk days. Nobody ever called me to say, hey, how's the day? It's sunny. They would call and say something was wrong. And it was my duty to ask them what was wrong, to listen to what was wrong, to empathize when they told me it was wrong, but also to observe their behavior, to observe what it was they were using in what moment of time. So if somebody calls you on a service desk and says, payroll's not working, if it's 9 a.m. on the 10th of the month, it's possibly not such a bad thing. But if it's 9 a.m. on the last working day of the month, it's probably quite a critical thing. So those basic skills, I think, should be, and I call it's ALO, asking, listening, observing, and empathizing. Because you can be taught the technology.
Yeah.
You need to have an interest in tech, don't get me wrong. But for me, those 4 skills, as in soft skills, are really important. If people are looking at what real, certification they need, which is a different way of answering the question, then I would take a look at ITIL. So ITIL is the most commonly used service management certification. But I also would not pigeonhole yourself. So what I mean by that is if you've got the asking, listening, observing, and empathizing skills, and you've got another set of skills that are more technology based, don't think you have to have ITIL to be a service management consultant or service management professional, but you have to have an appreciation of how you can blend what you do with how others do things. And also you need to be able to take people on a bit of a journey. So, and it all comes back to asking, listening, observing, and empathizing. They are the 4 key things that I would say every service management professional needs.
So you mentioned ITIL. Does that cover some of like the basic fundamentals, like service management?
Absolutely. So ITIL is certainly up there with the kind of most relevant qualifications, but also the most embedded. So ITIL has existed in various forms since the late 80s. It's existed in its most recent form, ITIL 4, since about 2018-19. But ITIL will, in its current form, and always has in fairness, but people have maybe misinterpreted it, it talks to you about guiding principles, about ways of working. It does all of that before you start talking about IT. So one of the guiding principles is focus on value. So that's a very different question to what do you want the IT service to do? Focus on value is what value do you want to obtain from this service? And there are many other behaviors. So ITIL 4 is one of several service management qualifications I would recommend, but I would definitely go back to study ITIL, take from it what you need, but then look at your organization and understand how it can help there. Don't try and take ITIL and force it into your organization because it simply won't work. Not designed for that.
So currently, right now, what do you see as some of like the key trends within service management?
So most people are going to say to you artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And it's true, they are very relevant, very of now.
Yeah.
But ultimately, in service management, we're dealing with services and people. So those trends, in my opinion, are just like fashion. They're cyclical. So they come and go. But what doesn't change is that there's people involved. Even with all the AI, there's still people involved, either at the end of the process or configuring the process. So for me, the trends that I see, and much of this is through my eyes, not necessarily the industry's eyes, are around acting as allies to one another. So in service management, we have to work across whole organizations. So how you work with people, how you support people is incredibly important. And service management has often stood behind these things called service level agreements, which are, we have to do this by this time, or we have to have a service available this much. That is what I see as fading away. And it's much more about offering value to services. The technology of AI is incredibly useful in the service desk environment from the point of view of speeding up the interaction with the consumer of a service desk. But it still needs to be designed with that human touch in mind. So for me, the trends are the co-creation of value in terms of working together to create value, building communities that support one another, and also enhance how we deliver IT services in multiple organizations, and also sustainability. So sustainability in IT is something that isn't really, in my opinion, considered enough. But how we run our IT services and how we deliver digital to our people is becoming more and more necessary. There's a number of agreements, the London Agreement and so on, that have been signed in the last few years that talk about how we deliver sustainable IT. So by that, I'm talking about solar-powered data centers or water-powered data centers. They, for me, are the trends that are developing outside of all that AI stuff, which is the obvious answer. But I tend to go for the less obvious stuff. So you'll probably get different answers from somebody else that works in service management.
Yeah, there's been a lot of AI and, like you said, ChatGPT, as they're kind of like the hot topics right now. So yeah. So when you look at your career, is there a particular project that was quite successful or that you found extremely interesting that you could share, and maybe what you learned from it?
I actually, not really a project, and this is a true story. So some of the projects I can't share because the clients I worked with.
Yeah.
so it's difficult to talk about them in any detail. But this is not a project, but it's an event which completely changed the way I thought about how I did support. So I had a customer call me, and you have to be of a certain vintage to remember this, but I had a customer call me on a service desk to say that their coffee holder wasn't working. I was like, do you mean a coffee holder? What on earth are you talking about? Going back to asking, listening, observing, and empathizing. And so what I had to do was say to an engineer, I can't fathom this one, unfortunately. Do you mind going out to this customer and just finding out where their coffee holder is, let alone why it's not working? Because we'd asked the question about the coffee machine. We'd asked the question about the kitchen. And she was like, no, it's under my desk. Okay, right. It turned out, and again, you have to be a certain vintage, but if you remember CD-ROMs, what this lady would do, and everyone who sat around her, would every day they'd come into work, they'd move their mouse so their computer in their mind would start. And then they'd open their CD-ROM and pop their coffee in there, and that's what they called their coffee holder, and her CD-ROM wasn't working. So the reason I'm mentioning this is it led on to so many things. So, and this becomes a project. So this small event led us to then understand that there was a number of people in the organization that were using their CD-ROM as a coffee holder. So we educated them that wasn't necessarily the right thing to do. It's not the best thing for the PC, and it's certainly not a coffee holder. But it also enabled us to realize that we were spending, give or take, £220 on every CD-ROM that we put in every PC. And we were issuing on this huge customer site around 2,000 PCs every year. So we were spending 2,000 times 200 every year on something that people were using as a coffee holder. So we began a project where we removed the CD-ROMs, where we recycled the CD-ROMs, and where we effectively saved the organization a bunch of money through that simple conversation. And the reason I use that as the example is because that is really the level of detail you want to get to when you're working on a project, is what is it we're really trying to achieve here and why? So all of those big projects that I can't necessarily talk about. So there's one which the project goal was don't end up on the front page of the Daily Mail. There was another one where it was don't lose billions of pounds. There was another one where it was don't lose all this information.
Mm.
But ultimately, with those three statements, it was 5 levels of why shouldn't we be on the front page of the Daily Mail? Why shouldn't we lose this money, etc. And that help desk call around the coffee holder made me understand that what somebody says to you they want isn't necessarily what they need.
Yeah.
And how you approach that situation. We never once laughed at that person or treated them with any level of less service than anyone else, even though we didn't have a clue what was going on, even when we knew what it was. We just did a little educational piece and then kicked off a project that would ultimately save the organization loads of money and also recycle all of those CD-ROMs out into places that needed them more. And I think that's a key, as I say, a key to any good project is being really clear on what it is you're trying to deliver and why.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice and a good perspective as well. So if we now put on your author hat, as an author, what do you kind of hope to contribute with in terms of the field of service management, and what do you hope like your readers will get from your writing?
That's a deep question, thank you. So I think it's worth pointing out firstly that I never intended to be an author, much like I never really intended to be a service manager, if I'm perfectly honest. But I was approached to write about it and I didn't have a clue where to start. And there's a famous, saying, start where you are. So that's what I did. I started, like the conversation we're having now, I started backtracking through my career. And so I guess to answer your question, I would like to inspire people to undertake a career in service management and understand why it's a good career. It's actually a great career. I've managed to work across, I think I counted up one day, 25 plus industries, from oil and banking, education, currently working in travel, insurance. You get to see a lot of the world and you get to see a lot of how the world works. So I'm hoping I can inspire people to do that. I hope that I can educate leaders that they need to really free their teams to be trusted, to deliver value. And I hope that I can help their teams understand how they can educate their leaders upwards to free them to do that. But ultimately, I think I would just like to demystify service management because not many people really know what it is. And therefore, they're not attracted to it as a career, or they don't free their teams up to deliver great services. But they see their job titles and they're like, okay, we need one of them. I'd like to demystify it so that it's more obvious what it is and the benefits of it, if there is such a thing as it when it comes to service management.
As is from a speaker's perspective, I mean, it might be similar. Like, what kind of audience do you typically address, and what are some of the key messages that you want to like convey?
So I address different types of audiences. So like day to day, I'll be speaking to senior leaders in organizations about their organization and their challenges. But ultimately, I'll be leaning on my experiences working in other huge organizations to really influence that. In terms of public speaking, outside of my client consultations, I've only actually done that once, which I did at SurVision a couple of weeks ago. And what I'm talking about there is that co-creation of value and just really helping the audience understand, I guess, if they weren't already aware, that for us to do anything, it can't be singular, it can't be siloed. We need to spread our wings and we need to involve as many people as possible and is relevant, to actually deliver value to customers and our colleagues and the people we work with. So that's why What I'm speaking about more and more now is the building of communities of practice that lift people out of their day-to-day issues and fires, because you're not always your best when you do that, and just talk about these things just like we are, so that you can come up with creative solutions that you work on together that feel really innovative but are actually common sense. You just don't necessarily have the time when you're in a moment to come up with those things. So it's about freeing people to think a bit differently so they can deliver value as part of a community. That's what I'm speaking about more and more at the moment.
Sure. I'm going back to the books. What are the title of some of the books that you've written?
So I've only got one that's officially out at the moment. It's called
Okay.
Co-Creating Value in Organisations
Okay.
with ITIL 4. It just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? But unfortunately, when you have to, it has to be quite prescriptive.
Yeah.
But it's themed around ITIL, but it's much more themed around how you can use ITIL to create value in your whole organisation and beyond.
Sure.
There'll be future books coming out, which are in the pipeline right now, but they're not quite released.
Cool. You mentioned as well debunking what the views that some people have when it comes to service management. Could you share a couple?
Yeah, so people think service management in some cases starts and ends with the service desk.
Yeah.
Or they think service management is about operating services. So if you're aware of it, major incident management is the most common one, change management is another, problem management another. What I like to do when I work with organizations is talk about the digital service lifecycle. So just like anything, whether it's an odd analogy, but whether it's us as humans or IT, it all starts off with what is it we're trying to achieve? So what is the strategy? Now you can relate that back to humans to, are we ready to have a family or are we not? But ultimately, things happen that mean that even if you're ready or if you're not, you end up having a family or you end up with an IT service. But the life cycle of a service is service management. So it's about the strategy. What are we trying to achieve and why? Going back to what I said earlier. It's about the design. So again, what are we designing? Why are we designing it in that way? Does it fit the strategy that we first set out for? Then there's how do you transition that? So how do you bring that to life? How do you give birth to the service? And when you receive that service, is it ready to do and add the value that you hoped it would? Then how do you operate that service? And that's the bit that people think is service management, is just that operation bit. But all this other stuff comes before. Then once you've got that service, you take it through to retirement. You don't just pop it on a shelf and let the customers carry on and never improve it.
Yeah.
You're continually improving it. You're continually capturing knowledge. And you may choose to retire it because it doesn't fit the strategy anymore. Or you may, in that strategy phase, think, oh, we've got a great idea. And in some organizations, they'll go and spend millions on that great idea. And then they'll realize that elsewhere in the organization, the great idea already exists and it's operating as a service. So it's about working across the organization. So, and people see service management and think it's just a small piece of an organization. I see it as one of the key enablers of an organization, along with finance, marketing, and all the other good stuff. It's so much more than just incident management and service desk, albeit they are critical and incredibly important.
Sure. And do you find that sometimes you also have to kind of educate even senior management of what it actually is?
Yes, and it's through no fault of their own, because they've not been brought up. They've maybe not worked on a service desk. They've maybe not worked in PMO. They've maybe not been in service management. They may have been fast tracked through an MBA, as an example, or they may have just come in from a completely different perspective. So yeah, you and I think you have to do it in all walks of life. The education of leaders is so much tougher than the education of people who are working in, because explaining the value to a leader is, you need to understand what's motivating them. So is it the bottom line? Is it to achieve their strategy? Whereas for other people, it's just, can I make your life easier? Can I help you with your everyday today? So yeah, and that's why it's enterprise service management, because you work, and why I mentioned a moment ago about the value co-creation. You need to work at multiple levels to really get the best out of service management. And that's why I'm changing it more and more to value co-creator as opposed to service management consultant. Because if you mention ITIL to a C-level leader, they'll just glaze over. If you talk about service and value, you'll probably get their interest.
Cool, thank you. So I know that you're a mentor for the Read Women in Tech program. What is that all about?
So the Read Women in Tech program is an amazing program. It's set up by the what you would commonly known as the recruitment company, I guess, Read, but they do so much more than that, Read Technology. It's a program that aims to help women already working in tech or women looking to work in tech through providing mentors in their fields, male or female, to really help them get to where they want to be. But also more and more, it's about working through kind of some of those ridiculous practices that exist, which we'd rather didn't exist in the professional world, that we restrict the opportunities that women are given or can earn. So it's a great program. I also do the same for the British Computer Society. But yeah, it's an awesome program from the point of view that you can act as an ally to people that need that, but also I learn as much from everybody I mentor as I hope they learn from me. And I think that for me is the best bit about the program on a personal level. But also I think it's just a great program. I wish it didn't exist, because I rather it shouldn't exist, but it does, because unfortunately, as you can see through any number of research papers, there's just not enough women working in tech, not enough women working in senior positions in organizations everywhere, and not enough women being given the opportunities they deserve, or even the opportunity to earn those opportunities. And that needs to change.
And so with some of those kind of challenges that you've just mentioned, what sort of advice do you normally offer to the women that you mentor?
So it's an interesting question, because it's almost easy for me, white middle-class male, to offer advice because I'm not in that situation. So I go back to that asking, listening, observing, and empathizing. So I ask about the experiences they've had and see if I can relate to those firstly through listening. Obviously empathize, because it's some of the stories I hear are absolute shockers. But the advice is, I talk more about how they can build a brand, how they can promote themselves in a way that really shows them in their very best light. So it might be like it could be as simple as a CV review. It could be as complex as looking at their brand on LinkedIn, the way they portray themselves. But the ultimate advice I always try to give is not to change. Like you are you, and you're great being you. What we need to do is really, we need to change what's going on that's making them feel that way, rather than changing how they feel in terms of how they feel about themselves. So yeah, the advice is often really simple stuff like try this on your CV and try that on your CV, or it can be just listening, because often I can't place myself in that position. And sometimes just having somebody you can speak to, who you can trust isn't going to take it any further and might have a little nugget to help you, is enough. So I wouldn't say I give any great sage advice. But what I do is, as I say, is listen and try and offer something constructive, and try my hardest to place myself in their position, which I've never been in.
Sure, that's nice. How has mentorship played a part in your career?
It's huge. I've been incredibly fortunate that I've had some awesome mentors throughout my career. I've had some terrible bosses as well,
Mm.
and I've had some great bosses, most of them great. But where it plays a part is I can picture myself asking them some of those questions and how they responded to me, but also where it's really played a part is it's led to me doing what I'm doing today with mentoring. I want to be able to give back what I was given. And it's in a bit of a slightly different context now, but I've also been really lucky that I've had some great female mentors who may have been in some of the positions that some of the people I speak to now have. So I'm able to go back to those people and say, I was asked this question, I couldn't place myself in that position. Were you ever in that position? And how did you handle it, if you don't mind me asking?
Mm.
So that I've been really fortunate from that perspective I've worked around good people who've acted as my mentors. Some don't even know they've been my mentor. Others have absolutely categorically, we've signed it off in blood, you're my mentor, and whenever I need you, I'm going to be there. But yeah, others have just been a mentor to me without even realizing. And so I think it's a huge part. And I would say to anybody working in any industry who's looking to make their way, obviously find yourself a mentor. Don't be afraid to ask, because some mentors are too embarrassed to act as the mentor. They don't feel like they're worthy of it. And if you ask them, not only will you probably find that they're really wanting to help, but you might help them be ready to help too. And it's difficult placing yourself in that position of the mentor, because I think it puts you on some sort of lofty perch that isn't really right. I don't see it as that. I just see it as people helping one another. But it has to have a label, so mentor is that label.
Mm. If anyone's interested in the Read Women in Tech, is it a case of just looking on the Read website to?
Yeah. If you're you can just Google Read Women in Technology program.
Yeah.
It's on LinkedIn too, the Read Women in Tech program. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm always talking about it. I run a Women in Technology IT service management community of practice that we've kicked off in the last 2 months, which is a way to kind of bring a community of people together to help one another, to be those allies.
Yeah.
And it's also a great way and this is what the program does really well, is there'll be calls where there's mentors and mentees on the call. So it's not just a one-to-one relationship, it can be a 12 to 12 relationship, or you might get on a call with one mentor and 12 mentees, or the reverse. So it's great. And because tech is so big, we've got people coming in who are just starting their career in tech, who are coming in from retail. There's a lady coming in from physics, another lady coming in from farming. But yeah, it's so diverse and incredibly inclusive that I think it's just a great program to help one another. So yeah, Read Women in Technology program on Google, or connect with me and I can point you in the right direction.
Sure. Earlier on, you mentioned the British Computer Society. Who are they?
So the BCS, or the British Computer Society, are basically a not-for-profit organisation that aims to make IT good for society. It's a great thing to join if you work in tech. Again, it's not just service management, so PMO are welcome. Anybody that works in or around tech is welcome. And the BCS covers a huge amount. So there's various committees. I sit on one of them around IT service management and IT asset management. But more importantly, it offers events to network. It offers career development and progression, training. It's a membership-based community, but it's not an extortionate amount to join. And also from there, if it really floats your boat, you can get post-nominals, which is letters after your name. You have to go off and prove that you're worth them and do a lot of work to get them, but it's really rewarding when you do. So it's a great it's a great organisation, and they've got a lovely office in the middle of London. So if ever, and also regional offices, but if ever you become a member, there's somewhere to go and work and to get some nice coffee and a free biscuit if that's all you need from it.
Sure. And as part of the committee, what work or like what kind of involvement do you have in some of the aspects that they work on?
Yeah, so in the BCS, we talk about just ways of working, new technologies. Obviously, AI comes up an awful lot, but we also set up a yearly event. So that we have a BCS committee event, which is for anybody to come to, like a conference. We also do monthly events, which are aimed at educating and helping people to work differently, work better, to make IT better. Last year, we had a sports psychologist or sports mind coach come in who talked to us all about how he trains elite sports people to deal with those moments in a game where it's like match point, where they've got to score or not lose, and how to handle that, which is actually really relevant when you're working on a conflict in day to day. With the BSI, we're talking about standards. So like any type of profession, IT and service management especially have certain standards that we have to try and live up to. And with the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, we're talking about standards, but we're also talking about the future. So how can we build standards that really enhance the digital services and IT as a career, as a service, and also something that enables organizations to really strive to deliver great sustainable careers for their people, as well as great results for their customers.
Sure. So throughout your career, how have you overcome or managed obstacles and setbacks?
So I'm guilty in the past of doing everything I can to avoid them. And what I mean by that is that I wasn't great at taking feedback. So I would challenge the setback possibly too much. So I'd go like fight or flight, and I'd just come straight and head on and try and challenge it that way. As I've grown more experienced, I've learned that they're learning experiences. I'd love to say that after all this time working in these organizations, that I'm perfect, and I'm not at all. So I see every day as a challenge, and how I approach them now is going back to that value question. What does value mean when we're doing this? If I failed, what have I failed to achieve in terms of value? And overcoming challenges or setback, it's easy for me to say now, but they're never as bad as you think they are at the time. I've got my own channel called It's All About Choices. And the point of that channel is to talk about careers, but also to say that just because you made a choice then, you don't have to really concern yourself with it too much now. As long as you've learned from it, you've moved on, and if you needed to, make amends. It's more about saying, try something. If it doesn't work, try again, because practice makes perfect. So the challenges that I've had to overcome have formed me to be where I am today, and I don't see any of them as setbacks now. So it's a roundabout way of saying, if something happens and it doesn't feel like it's a good thing, learn from it. That's how I would overcome a challenge or setback.
Great, that's really good advice. Do you have any final words?
No, just to say thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me on. It's really good to have this conversation. And if anybody wants to continue the conversation, then as I say, I'm active on LinkedIn, and they can hook up with me there, and we can continue it there.